I'd like to start out by asking you, our panel tonight is on the top diseases, and we have spoken about some, but there are some things that we don't talk about that much in public, and I was wondering if each of you would just share if you have any thoughts on what the research shows regarding these conditions. So let me read you a Washington Post article. It says, the headline in the article says, half of adults will get chronic kidney disease, model predicts. And I'm mentioning this because cancer, heart disease, and diabetes are the topics that are often talked about. Chronic kidney disease, to someone like me, is not really on the radar, and so I was wondering if you could comment. Just read you the first paragraph. It says, a new model predicts that about half of all people aged 30 and older in the United States will develop chronic kidney disease during their lifetime, a surprisingly large proportion for a condition that is not on the radar screens of many Americans. Writing in the American Journal of Kidney Diseases Monday, a team of researchers concluded that 54% of people the ages of 30, of people between the ages of 30 and 49 will develop the disease. The figure is 52% for people between the ages of 50 and 64, and 42% for those 65 and older. This compares to lifetime incidences of 12.5% for breast cancer for women, 30 to 38% for diabetes, and 90% for hypertension in middle-aged men and women, the researchers wrote. In 2020, 14.4% of all people 30 or older will have chronic kidney disease, up from 13.2% today. In 2030, the proportion will rise to 16.7%, the researchers say. It's a high number, and certainly the organizations that focus on kidney disease are trying to raise awareness of that number.
Start with you. Next time I'll suggest we start with you. Well, you heard earlier in the day the case study that Hans Diehl presented, which was actually one of my patients. And this illustrates one of the issues around kidney disease that perhaps is relevant to this conference. This woman who had 16 different conditions or diseases saw all 16 of them reverse during the 2 or 3 years that she was under my care and under the care of the lifestyle change program called the CHIP program. She was on the kidney dialysis waiting list, and her doctor told her that she would need dialysis. It was just a matter of time. We changed her diet to a whole foods, plant-based diet. The protein that she was eating was less than the total she had been used to eating, and it was plant-based rather than animal-based, and that's easier on the kidneys. And her creatinine, one of the measures of poor kidney function, dropped from 2.8 to 1.5 or 1.0. And so she was able to reverse that condition. And as a gastroenterologist, I was taking care of her GI problems in a way that would improve overall health. And that, for me, underscores one of the sayings, two of the sayings that I like. One is that intelligent self-care is the new primary care, because her doctor, her nephrologist, told her that he was not interested in seeing her lab results from this lifestyle change program because he would not be a part of her false hope that she would get kidney disease, and he just wouldn't be a part of it. And the second thing is the saying that you treat one, you treat them all. With the chronic diseases that Americans are facing, when you make a therapeutic lifestyle change, all these conditions begin to improve simultaneously. So not being a nephrologist, not owning a kidney dialysis center, not owning stock in the kidney dialysis center machine maker company, I can't tell you any more about it. But what I love is the fact that if I just do what's right for the patient, that's one of the conditions that improves.
I think that we have to realize that, you know, diseases of the vascular system, it's all the same. It's whether it happens in the brain or the heart or the kidneys. A bad diet destroys our blood vessels to all of these vital organs. And, you know, a couple of interesting things. Number one is that the Adventist Health Study showed that vegetarians and vegans have, I think it was either 50 or 52% less kidney disease than health-conscious non-vegetarians. So this is really important stuff. And I concur. I had recently a client who had, he had type 2 diabetes, was on 40 units of insulin and 17 medications. He was in early stage renal failure. He had peripheral artery disease, chronic gout. He had just had a major heart attack. He had, hypertension, you name it, he had it. And his kidneys were failing. And his doctor told him that he had a progressive, irreversible set of diseases. The only thing he could do was try to prolong his life, and he estimated that at most he would live 2 years. Well, what happened to this man was his son, at 36 years of age, was diagnosed with a salivary gland tumor. And this son happened to be at a conference that I was speaking at, and he asked me, could I help him? And of course I said I would help him. There were no guarantees with cancer, but we put him on a fairly high raw vegan diet, very well balanced, and he went into remission. But the coolest part of this, the most beautiful part of this, is his whole entire family adopted the diet that he was going on to support him in his journey. And his father adopted this diet thinking it would do absolutely nothing for him because he knew he had an irreversible progressive disease, that nothing would help. And what ended up happening is within fairly short order, within 6 months to a year, every single disease he had was gone. He is now on 0 insulin and 0 pills. He has normal kidney function. And the most wonderful, the most wonderful part of this is he was, in his 70s. He said, I used to spend my days being in pain and taking insulin, taking pills, being dizzy, feeling sick, and knowing I'm going to die. Now I don't know what to do with all my time. I spend 2 hours a day at the gym. He said, I feel like I'm 25 years old. And he went to his physician and he said to his physician, why did you not tell me that this was possible? And his physician said, because I did not know it was possible. And he said, I do now. And so that really is the power that we have as individuals. This system is not going to change until we as consumers demand it changes.
Thank you. That's really good. I guess it's my turn to comment. I just wanted to make the point that most kidney disease isn't like my other two colleagues just said, they're not inherently diseases of the kidney per se. There are overall ill health of the body that affects the kidney as it destroys every other part of the body. The major cause of kidney disease is high blood pressure, putting pressure on the kidney, atherosclerosis, interfering with blood flow to the kidney, diabetes, which damages the cells of the kidney through the advanced glycation end products, and autoimmune diseases, where the immune system isn't functioning well, and it attacks the kidney through diseases like nephrosclerosis and lupus and other diseases that affect the kidney negatively. And so the kidney is just the end organ that gets damaged when the body isn't functioning or isn't healthy. And every one of those diseases that affects kidney function independently can be improved dramatically by nutritional excellence, by superior nutrition. And we're talking here about a diet that's rich in nutrients, nutrient-rich, nutritionally complete, hormonally favorable, and also plant-rich, right? Mostly where because animal protein puts a lot of pressure on the kidney and puts the kidney under stress, but also is excitatory to autoimmune conditions. And one thing I wanted to mention is that, and which we haven't mentioned yet, is that I have seen a lot of patients where they're diabetic nephropathy, and one of my most common referrals of specialists to my practice were from nephrologists. Don't get a lot of referrals from cardiologists and diabetologists and endocrinologists because they feel they're going to lose their patients, but the nephrologists, refer me a lot of patients, especially the diabetics, and they inevitably are very excited with the results. But what's most fascinating is watching people with autoimmune conditions of the kidney get better, where people who have kidney failure from lupus, and I can up you on one of those creatinine stories, one of those people got well, which is quite fascinating. A young girl of 19 years old who was on the National Renal Transplant list waiting for a new kidney with lupus, whose creatinine was 4.2. So when she asked me if there was any hope for her getting well, I said, I don't think so, your kidney is shot. But she actually got well and earned a creatinine of 0.8 from a creatinine of 4.2, which was like, I couldn't believe that could happen. But I have seen over the years people with serious autoimmune conditions, including your specialty, including ulcerative colitis make recovery, people with ulcerative colitis make recoveries, and people with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis and scleroderma and all types of autoimmune conditions of the kidney and of the liver, autoimmune hepatitis as well, get well and have the team of doctors at the hospital always not say something as favorable or as respectful as that you said to you. Usually they say, oh, it's just something that happened. It was spontaneous remission. It had nothing to do with the diet. It couldn't possibly have been that. It's just spontaneously remission, that you just one of these things happened 1 in a million cases, you got well. And I said, I guess I just have to be very lucky. All these cases are happening in my practice, not in the regular doctors, but I guess it's just a matter of luck. Maybe it was just all luck. But
isn't it true you're a genie?
Yeah, right.
Back in the 80s, excuse me.
Oh, you're hooked on that.
No, somehow it's not working. Back in the 80s, I awoke enough to start to recognize a trend with the African American community and the Hasidic Jewish community. They were the first people, they were the canaries in the mines with these kidney disorders. And when I looked at their diet, it was quite similar. The African American diet is not an African diet. Matter of fact, an African diet, in its authentic sense, is actually a pretty healthy diet. The Hasidic Jewish community are people who were the poorest among the Jewish population in Europe and lived in ghettos and pretty much ate similarly. High proteins, high fats. I mean, everything is fat, animal fat. And sadly, it bloomed. It's not just these people today that have kidney disorders. As the statistics were just articulated by Stephen, if anything, I think they're conservative. Now, besides a vessel disease, where we're cutting blood flow off, here's my take on it, and here's exactly why animal proteins are a major culprit for this. Matter of fact, I actually believe if you removed animal proteins, the vast majority of kidney cases, other than the rare time where a kidney was injured and created high blood pressure, would probably be prevented. There are in all animal foods 3 elements that degrade all organs, but certainly the kidney. Now, most of you don't realize the kidney is very thin. Somehow, when I was growing up, I used to picture it being this really strong stainless steel thing that was there, but it's like paper thin, and it's mostly water. And nitrogen comes from these animal-based foods. Sulfuric acid comes from these animal-based foods, and uric acid does. And you can actually eat tissue with those. If we had enough of that in this glass, and we put our finger in it, long enough, you would actually see degradation of the tissue. So no wonder we're having such a vulnerable organ go south in half the population over the next 2 generations.
Just want to make sure you don't put your finger in my glass.
I know, I'll give you mine. The second thing is, let's tell the many listeners worldwide who may already have a kidney problem or know somebody, a loved one or a friend that does, you can't just get on a plant-based diet the way that we would be suggesting if you have a kidney disorder, because the kidney needs potassium. Ironically, once the kidney is not functioning, potassium will injure it. So you've got to go to the types of foods that are low potassium. One example is asparagus.
is a great vegetable, helps the kidney, and by the way, has low potassium. Whereas if I went and I took spinach and went one step further and took massive amounts of spinach juice, I could actually injure my kidney if I had a problem. So this has to be really worked. The person enduring this problem would have to work with a conscious physician who knows what he or she's doing and has enough experience with plant-based diets and this. And of course, we've had lots of that. Our medical team has had lots of that, but not everyone can come to Hippocrates. So search out the physician. Honest people like this are going to tell you, I don't know, or I do know, or I know somebody I can get advice from. But most alternative physicians would not know how to deal with kidneys. But you said something encouraging. People who work with kidneys are referring more people to you. So they must be realizing the dietary.
I think they saw the results, and they were impressed with the kind of results and kept sending patients. But I think that the point I was making, that interestingly, to find the nephrologists and the neurologists too more open to working with dietary methods and referring people, whereas the people, you know what I mean? Because for some reason they're more open than maybe the cardiologists and the endocrinologists. I was just in my experience for some reason.
Well, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
I think inevitably everyone's going to become open, because if we have a failed system, as we're learning here, it's not they're bad people and good people and we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. It's not that simple. I don't know any doctor, and I know lots of doctors, who went into this for the wrong reason. When they were 18 and decided, I'm going to dedicate 12 years of educational life, I assure you it was because they were affected by the death of somebody close to them. They saw somebody suffer. And they were intellectually capable of enduring 12 years of that education. Now, I don't know any doctor, because I've talked to numbers of them, that thought when they went to get educated that the entire education, not the entire, but a great part of the education, would be involved with just writing prescriptions. I thought that they literally, most of them believed that they would be helping people, counseling people. They could spend a half an hour with a person. Unless you go into a private practice and almost have a boutique practice today, you can't spend an hour with a person. I'm sure that physicians here probably do that now, but ask them when they were in practice before they were alternative physicians if they could do that. You just can't. And God forbid if you work in a hospital today. I know two people that are hospital or ex-hospital administrators. One graduated at the top of her class at Yale. She said that we would get on top of the doctor if he spent more than 5 minutes with a patient. Now, you can't say anything in 5 minutes. Hello, goodbye, and I'm sorry. That's it.
Okay, this is an article. I'd like to have your feedback on what the research shows.
I thought we were done.
This is from the Daily Mail, which is a British newspaper. Dementia cases to double by 2030, says World Health Organization. The number of people suffering dementia around the globe is expected to nearly double to 65.7 million sufferers by 2030, the World Health Organization has warned. By 2050, it is likely to rise 70% above today's figure of 35.6 million sufferers. Dementia is caused by a variety of brain illnesses that affect memory, thinking, behavior, and the ability to perform everyday activities. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia and makes up about 70% of the cases. The report published with Alzheimer's Disease International said there are 7.7 million new cases of dementia reported each year. And then skipping down to the article, it says, the study also highlights a general lack of information and understanding about the disease. So if you could each tell me what the research shows.
The new guys first. I just read the article that came out in the past 6 months from Dale Bredesen, who's a dementia researcher in Los Angeles. And my sister lives 45 minutes from his clinic, and she has dementia. My mother had dementia, and I don't remember what you call it. Oh, Alzheimer's, yes.
Old-timers.
Yeah, old-timers. So in this study, he reported on 10 patients 9 of whom recovered. They were moderate to severe Alzheimer's patients. One did not recover and was the most severe case. But the others returned to their normal lives, including back to work. And my mother left library science at the journalism school in Columbia, Missouri early because she couldn't remember how to do the Dewey Decimal System. So to me, this article was the first. I'm sure others have read other articles that are introducing the concept of the reversibility of dementia. And they had 30 different interventions, and the person who is healthy in their living, but everyone in their family had the disease, got a different mix of those 30 interventions to turn them around than someone who was a couch potato and ate only garbage and had no meaning or comfort in life and were getting dementia. That was a whole different set out of the 30. So it introduces several concepts. One is that there's such a multifactorial cause of diseases, and we've grown up in a system that wants to find one cause, one solution, one pathway to fix it. And we realize then in a few months or years that that disturbs lots of other pathways. So this idea that there's multiple pathways and different people have different sets of needs. So there's the personalization of the care once you begin to get the idea of what to do. So that's very important. And the idea now that when something new like this happens and is put forth, we need to have it documented in many different hands and many different settings before we understand how it's really going to work. For example, like the potassium in the whole foods plant-based diet might need a little filtering when you are working with an advanced kidney disease patient. So I think this is very exciting, and I don't think we know how to use that tool yet unless some of the other panelists do, but that's our work, is to stay on top of that, because we are the generation of people that that news story was talking about. Dale Bredesen, B-R-E-D-E-S-E-N, right? And it was published in the journal Aging, A-G-I-N-G.
I love what you said about this being such a multifactorial disease, and I think what we're just starting to understand is it's not a disease that's just the luck of the draw, it's another lifestyle disease. And if we're consuming plant-based, a plant-based diet, we can help to reduce oxidative stress. We can help to reduce the process of atherosclerosis in the blood vessels in the brain. We can increase, antioxidant status. We can decrease inflammation. There are so many things we can do, but there are also things that we need to be very conscious of. And I think one of those things is having sufficient essential fatty acids in the diet. And there are some people that are really doing an extremely low-fat diet, and their intake of essential fatty acids may be so low that they're not producing enough of the biologically active forms of omega-3s, the eicosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid, that are important for brain health. And so these are things that need to be considered as we're trying to put together a truly optimal plant-based diet. And so there are some studies showing that vegans have a reduced risk, and some studies have actually shown increased risk. And I think it really depends on the quality of the diet. So we're wanting to maximize the components of the diet that are protective, minimize the toxic, there are so many components in the diet, all of the persistent organic pollutants and heavy metals and so forth that are neurotoxic and can contribute to these kinds of diseases. So I think we need to be conscious of that, but we also need to be conscious of getting enough essential fats, getting enough vitamin D, getting enough of the essential nutrients.
I'm on. Thanks.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I can continue on that note, just to give a little more information. I'm in complete agreement that the phytochemicals and antioxidants present in a broad assortment of natural plant foods protect the delicate membranes and tissues of the brain and the eye. The eye is a window to the brain, and the people get macular degeneration and diabetic retinopathy, and if they have eye disease, they have brain disease too. And you could see the disease in the eye, usually you can see the disease in the brain, but we know that those diseases of neurologic tissue are protected by the broad assortment of phytochemicals in green vegetables, in red foods, in purple foods. In other words, blueberries and blackberries are very protective, and green vegetables, especially green cruciferous vegetables, are very protective, and the organosulfide compounds in onions are very protective. And so natural plant foods eaten in their natural state supply the brain and the rest of the body with nutrients it needs for normal function to allow us to live a long and healthy life without getting degeneration of these organs. But when you eat a diet that's so high in processed foods and animal products, both, which neither of them contain phytochemicals and antioxidants, our tissues suffer with the buildup of free radicals and advanced glycation end products, build up and destroy neurologic tissue, and we get poor circulation of the brain and shrinkage of the brain with aging. And once you get significant shrinkage of the brain, you lose memory and you're somewhat demented, and that part is not reversible. You can't grow back a new brain. You can't grow, brain tissue can't regrow, and a lot of dementia is not reversible, but it would have been preventable. And so the major cause of dementia is atherosclerosis and lack of oxygen and nutrient delivery to the brain from a poor diet. Now, on the other hand, what Brenda just brought up is the fact that some vegans are placing themselves at risk of having dementia with later life. Number one, if you're going to be on a vegan diet, a healthy vegan diet, and you're going to live a lot longer, and you're not going to have likelihood of having an early life death due to sudden cardiac death or heart attack or cancer, so you might live to be 85, 90, 95, 100 years old. More chance for you to have brain injury or memory loss or dementia in your later years if you don't take good care of your health when you're younger. And a lot of vegans are taking risks with their health because their fervor and excitement about the enthusiasm for this diet makes them feel, I think, invulnerable to think that they don't have to be careful with nutrients, to have adequate nutrients. We did a study, or I should say people that I was involved with did a study on 166 vegans who were not supplementing with EPA and DHA. But most of them were using adequate levels of flaxseed or flaxseed oil or walnuts. And we found that out of the 167 people, 67% were borderline deficient or insufficient based on an omega-3 index of being 4 or above. The lab considered 6 or above ideal, but we considered 4 adequate, and 67 people fell, I think it was 67% fell below 4. Well, that meant that about, there's a certain percent were adequate, did have adequate levels, but the more concerning part was 27% were below 3, and a small percent, I think 5 or 6% were below 2. In other words, there were some people that were very, very deficient in their omega-3 index, which could forebode them developing dementia in their later life. But yet there's a broad spectrum of the vegan community thinks that's not necessary, but the facts are, and studies haven't been done to know that's not necessary, and we have to be conservative here and err on the side of caution and make sure if there are people who are going to be on a strict vegan diet, they either check a blood test to check adequacy, or they take a low-dose supplement. And we did in the study, when we took the people that were deficient, we supplemented them later with a very low dose, about 200 milligrams of the EPA-DHA combination, and almost all of them, I think 49 out of 50, became sufficient with that little tiny dose. You didn't need much. The body, in other words, the body utilizes that small amount if it needs it. It doesn't, whereas if it didn't need it, it wouldn't utilize it. And I don't think that the omega-3, omega-6 index is that important, because if you're thin and not eating fat, if you're burning off your calories, you're not storing a lot of omega-6 fat, you're burning it for energy, and your body can take the omega-3 from the ALA, or the walnuts and flax seeds, and the little bit of maybe algae-derived DHA you're taking, and hold on to that, utilizing it appropriately on the cell membranes and in the brain. But one thing I wanted to add is that when we looked at the data in this study, and we tried to ascertain whether the people who were low were those not eating walnuts and flaxseed or any ALA. Maybe we could have had the fact that if they ate enough of those precursors to DHA and EPA, they would produce enough, and we found that that didn't help. That wasn't true. There was no good correlation between the ALA consumption and the EPA and DHA, the DHA consumption, meaning that the primary differentiating feature for deficiency was genetic differences in conversion enzyme activity. that that some people just produce it adequately and other people don't. And some think some people absorb certain nutrients less effectively than others. So it's a little bit of caution that that we're talking about here. That there are some people in the vegan community don't recommend eating nuts and seeds. The diets are extremely low in fat, and they also don't recommend taking an EPA or DHA supplement. And that combination can be potentially risky for some people if they live long enough later on in life. And we want to make sure that that for us who really want to live this way, we want to make sure we're protected, or at least being conservatively careful here.
This is an important subject, so I'll try to share as concisely as I can the experience I have with this. Number one, so everyone knows the numbers, probably everyone here knows it, that my generation, the baby boom generation, it's conservatively estimated that 25% of us will have Alzheimer's disease. I didn't say dementia, memory loss, Alzheimer's disease. This equates to millions of people worldwide. Many of you listening today, take heed to what we're saying. The second thing, so we don't alarm anyone about vegan diets being deficient, this is the least deficiency diet on the planet Earth. Meat, dairy diets are deficient diets. But erring on the side of caution is something that I'm completely in agreement with. Now, 20 years ago, Framingham, which is a offshoot of Harvard, who everyone admires if you like research. When Framingham says it, you know it's correct. They came out with a study and said that standard medical blood tests were not correct on B12. And up until then, Hippocrates Institute was the come-to place in the vegan community globally, because we had done thousands and thousands and thousands of blood tests, many reflecting the B12. And we bet that that was correct. Framingham told us it was not. So I get into a panic because I'm out traveling the globe telling people B12 is important. Now, why are we speaking about B12? It's the most important nutrient to stop memory loss, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease, and neurological disease. It's the number one most important. We then rapidly adopted a nutritional blood test, and I'd never done that as a nutritionist before because I thought they were all frauds. They were taking blood out, seeing what was floating around in the bloodstream and saying you had it or didn't. Finally, a philanthropic gentleman in Texas who reversed disease, I believe it was cancer, on diet, funded endlessly the University of Texas, and they created something called SpectraCell test. And so 20 years ago, 19 years ago, we adopted that, and this is a very definitive test. Hold your horses out there in the world and here. 70% of the population of the world lacks B12. Meat eaters, dairy eaters, fish eaters, chicken eaters have about a 7 to 8% higher incidence of B12 deficiency than do vegans and vegetarians. Raw food vegans, out of Fontana's work, Washington University, St. Louis, shows us raw food vegans have the least. Now why? Because we're the best, we're wonderful? No. Because B12 is a bacteria from soil. If you're a vegan, you're cooking your food, the bacteria is dead. If you're a meat eater, a fish eater, a chicken eater, a dairy eater, you're cooking your food and you're not eating vegetables, so of course you have a slighter high. But vegans and raw food vegans have B12 deficiencies too. So the one supplement that our medical team absolutely suggests all of you look into and think about taking is a proper bacterial form of B12. If you don't take any other supplement, please do that. But then I completely concur with what was said here. The studies done in Los Angeles, which I've read, by the way, and Dr. Fuhrman. Essential fatty acids are incredibly important. Now, you've been conned by the fish oil and fish industry to think fish oil is a great source. It is not a great source. I said last night, and I'll repeat again, the International Organization, the #1 organization on oils, discouraged the consumption of fish oil. So do I, and I'm sure everyone here does too, because it leads to disease, cancers, heart disease, yes, heart disease, etc. Where do fish get their oil from? Joel basically alluded to it, from algae. So part of the Hippocrates diet for 30 years had been algae. If you're at Hippocrates and on the diet, you're on algae. And it is the only omega oil that literally is identical to the fat that makes up your brain. So when we take flax or we take walnut, that happens, but it's so minuscule amount. You know, if you take a pound, you may get a little tiny bit. So going directly to the algae are my suggestion. Now, if you have a deficiency, they actually make an extract from the algae. And I highly encourage you finding that. On the internet, I'm sure you can find that. And consider that. That's what our medical team would tell people to do. The next thing is, my wife wisely calls dementia and Alzheimer's stage 3 diabetes. There has been plethora of research that shows that high sugar contents lead to memory loss, dementia, etc. So removing that. And Sunday, to close the conference, I'll be having a 90-minute conference on sugars and all the latest research, and we'll touch on dementia with that. But when I was writing a book for the Swiss 15 years ago called Longevity, I said, as long as I don't just have to write about nutrition, I'll do this. And I was then looking at the best research on dementia, memory loss, etc. It was being conducted at Harvard at that point by a very young man who was interested in centenarians. And when they had discovered the classic gene for Alzheimer's disease, they found centenarians, 100-year-old people, that had the exact gene but didn't have dementia. And was it a food commonality that prevented that? No. It was use of mind. Now, in those days, they were doing crossword puzzles. Now we do luminosity or a computer program for it. These were very active social people. They were dating. 100-year-old, they were out dating. They were socializing. They had a community that surrounded them. So let's not only get stuck on the dietary aspect or supplemental aspect. Memory use is going to keep you young, and you know that. How many of you have known somebody that was completely vibrant at 70 or 80 and their wife or husband died, and within months they lost it completely? And the last thing I'll have to say about this is that you're going to end up with much more dementia because of the lower oxygen counts if you saturate the bloodstream in the veins, the vessels of the body, with animal fat. It's just common sense. If you grab your neck and squeeze it hard, you're not going to be very conscious in a short time. And you've been figuratively grabbing your neck and squeezing it hard by filling your veins up with whipped cream and every other ungodly thing that you seem to have liked in the past. So diet does play a role, but there's more than just diet involved in this issue.
I think I'd like to add something about B12. And maybe we should just talk about that briefly because it's important, because you brought it up. And that is that the B12 blood test, the normal is considered, let's say, between 250 and 900. And what you started to allude to, which is true, and that a normal B12 blood test between 250 and 500 or between 250 and 450 doesn't guarantee that you have normal B12. Even though it might be normal in that range, but it may not be. And that's where we sometimes draw a test called an MMA, methylmalonic acid, or even a homocysteine, but a methylmalonic acid is usually better, could help differentiate that borderline low B12, whether more is needed or not. But one thing we have to keep in mind that as we age, that the need for B12 increases because our absorption and utilization of B12 can decrease, and we can have less production of intrinsic factor in the elderly. So we have to be concerned about B12 deficiency being a cause of memory loss or problems in later life. So it's important to make sure you have adequate levels that's high enough. And the other thing to recognize is that the RDI for B12, which I think is 4 micrograms a day, is not adequate for a vegan. Because if you're on an animal product-based diet and you're having little animal products 20 meals of the week and you're absorbing 1 or 2 milligrams per meal and you get 4 or 5 micrograms a day added up, that's going to work for you. But for a vegan who's taking a B12 supplement once a day or once every other day, you're not going to absorb a lot of that supplement. You're not going to absorb, you only absorb a certain limited amount, and maybe you only absorb 2 milligrams. You took 10 milligrams. Or 5 milligrams, but you only absorb 2, and that's once a day. You didn't even get the RDI into you, and that may not be enough. So the point I'm making now is that if you're taking supplements to meet your B12 need, you have to go a little higher because you're not getting them regularly each meal. We have to take like 50 to 100 or 200 if you're on, especially as we age, to go a little higher as we get over the age of 75 when your B12 absorption goes down. Because we can absorb it not through the normal intrinsic factor receptor mechanism, but by diffusion. When we take a higher amount, we can get the extra amount into us. So I think it's important that we become a little bit of like B12 experts. Maybe you could add to that.
Is sublingually better?
It doesn't matter.
Well, let me add to it. It's the type of B12. Is it bioactive or is it not? Is it a chemically made B12 or not? This, to me, is the most pertinent question.
Just to clarify, the RDA is 2.4 micrograms.
2.4.
And 2.4 micrograms. But that is not sufficient to keep homocysteine levels down. And when homocysteine starts to rise, our risk of heart disease and dementia and even problems with birth defects and so forth also begins to rise. And so most experts are suggesting that if you're taking, two things that's really important to know. Number one is that the Institute of Medicine recommends that everyone over the age of 50, so regardless of whether or not you consume animal products, everyone over the age of 50 should not rely on animal products for B12. And that is very simply because you must cleave the B12 off the protein it's bound to, which it's bound to in animal products, in order to be able to absorb it. And probably somewhere close to 10 to 30% of people over 50 don't produce enough enzymes and acid to be able to actually do that job of cleaving the B12 off the protein. And so it doesn't matter whether or not you're vegan or non-vegan. And what's really important is vegans may actually be at an advantage if they're using a regular supplement, whereas non-vegetarians may think they're fine because they're getting B12 in animal products, and they don't even realize that there's that risk after 50. So that's important to know. So what do we recommend? We recommend, experts recommend somewhere 1,000 to 2,500 micrograms 2 to 3 times a week, okay? And if you're consuming methylcobalamin, then because it's slightly less stable, you may need to be taking 1,000 micrograms daily rather than 2 or 3 times a week. And the other thing to know is if you're taking it on a daily basis, the recommendations range from about 10 to about 250 micrograms a day. And we still don't know for sure exactly how much is needed because it's different for different people depending on how efficiently you're able to absorb it. So I think those are just a few other things. And I was just, when you mentioned B12, I went, was I brain dead when I was talking about this, forgetting to mention B12, because it is hugely important. And vegans who are...
Oh, it went off.
Uh-oh, I got cut off.
Here we go.
Here, try this one.
Vegans who are not supplementing tend to have levels of in the 120 to 160 range, as opposed to 400 plus range that they should be at. So this is, you know, it's just don't fool around with B12. Make sure you have a source.
You know, being in practice for 25 years and taking care of a lot of people in the vegan community, I've seen a lot of people develop severe B12 deficiency. There was a contingency of people who felt that B12 was not necessary and that, you know, a healthy diet of natural foods would give us all we need, and I've seen people die from B12 deficiency. I had one young man came to me, he was a national champion kickboxer, and he couldn't walk, couldn't stand up, he couldn't balance himself and couldn't walk anymore without assistance.
That's one of the symptoms.
Yeah, because it affects your neurologics, your longer nerves first. But he made a recovery, actually, with B12 supplements. He got well, and he told people on his radio show that he recovered from MS. Really. Then I actually had, then I knew somebody who actually passed away because of a super high homocysteine, but a B12 level of 40. His B12 level was 40, and his homocysteine was up in the 90s, actually, and he developed atherosclerosis and had and died due to B12 deficiency. I even knew a person years ago who came to me because she was a big, her guru said you don't need B12, and I told her that you don't need B12, and she was actually near dying and still refusing to take B12. Crazy. Because she had developed this problem. And I had another woman who was actually paralyzed and couldn't walk for a long, long time, and got somewhat better, but didn't get all her function back from B12 deficiency. And I've seen a lot over the past years.
You led us into a good conversation here, both of you. I think let's talk about the symptoms of B12 deficiency. Pernicious anemia is one of them. So if your nose is tingling and you're scratching it a lot, your hands, your extremity, your feet, your toes, that's pernicious anemia. Now you're lucky if you see that, because some people could get into paralysis, like Joel just said. You're starting to lose your memory, and you may have been perfectly fine a year ago, and now you're skipping a lot. You don't really see that. You may also have dizzy, and it's not low blood pressure. Of course, if you have low blood pressure, that's possible, or blood sugar problem. But if you're having these symptoms and know, you've gone to a physician and know you don't have either of the above, you have to look at the B12. And again, when I look at 70% of the population globally, we work with an international audience lacking this. This is not a small issue. This is not a small issue at all. This is the most important issue you're probably going to hear us speak about tonight. So please look into this and learn about it and read about it and begin supplementing.
Can you take too much?
If you take a proper B12, you cannot take too much.
The early signs are tingling of the feet would be an early sign.
I have an article from the Chicago Tribune. President Obama may have joked with reporters when they asked how his throat was feeling after he was diagnosed with acid reflux. But acid reflux can be a serious health threat. Up to 20% of Americans suffer from typical symptoms of gastroesophageal reflux 2 times per week, says Gilbert Simone, a gastroenterologist in Thousand Oaks. For most of these people, the fiery sensation of heartburn is a painful nuisance. For an unlucky few, however persistent, acid reflux can lead to a deadly cancer of the esophagus. Could each of you tell me what the research says?
My new friend.
Most people have heartburn or acid reflux at one time or another in their life, often from some overindulgence in something. But there are a group of people where the valve at the bottom of the esophagus, which is supposed to be more or less one-way valve, doesn't work. And they really do regurgitate stomach acid and digestive enzymes and bile. And we used to, when I was practicing regularly, we were screening people who had heartburn frequently enough that they took a medication twice a week or more. We were screening them for Barrett's esophagus, named after Dr. Barrett, who discovered this change in the lining. People actually grew a lining from their stomach. The stomach lining actually grew up into the esophagus to the level of the reflux. So you sort of had this backsplash area, and it would take on a new lining that was used to acid, like the stomach lining. And a new lining in a place that does not belong is very unstable, and there's the risk then of developing carcinoma of the esophagus in this displaced gastric lining. So we would check people regularly for this. And I remember the treatment of putting people's head legs up on blocks, so that they would be at a slant, and the acid would tend to stay down in the stomach when they lie down. And then we got these powerful proton pump inhibitors that would actually block acid production for 24 hours at a time. And that made a huge difference in the amount of complaints that we heard and in the amount of ulcers that we found in the esophagus. But blocking one's acid is not a good idea. And so maybe some other people would like to talk about that. Oh, yeah. Helicobacter pylori infection is an overgrowth of bacteria in the stomach lining that actually can can cause ulcers. It's actually one of the main causes of ulcers. When I was in gastroenterology training in New Haven in the 70s, I was a control patient in a study looking at duodenitis and whether x-rays could show this inflamed duodenum or whether it could only show ulcers and so on. And then later in practice, I developed an ulcer. And the biopsy showed a huge infection with Helicobacter pylori infection. Really? And so we looked back at the biopsies from the control patients 10 years earlier in my training period, and it was loaded with Helicobacter pylori, but no one knew of its significance at the time. And so when I started in practice, I scoffed at the old practitioners that were treating ulcers with milk and cream every few hours because I knew how to use Tagamet and Prilosec and all these wonder drugs. And I didn't understand why they looked at me sort of tongue-in-cheek, that I was so enthusiastic about my new therapies. And then when we realized that H. pylori was causing the ulcers, then I understood. You don't...
We didn't discover that until the 90s.
Yes, yes. And so when new things come out, the one who most recently graduated is the most excited about it. And the old guys have seen, and gals have seen things come and then not be so good, or something else is involved. So we have to give time to some of these things until we know what's happening. But the relationship between H. pylori and reflux esophagitis is hard to understand. H. pylori, in some settings, protects people from reflux esophagitis, and you kill off the H. pylori so they don't get the ulcers, and then the reflux is worse. And the thing that I want someone else on the panel to explain is why some of the symptoms that I treated for years as if it was the enemy, if acid was the enemy, now we're finding out that some of those symptoms are caused by not enough acid. And so we'll see what the panel does with that.
I'm going to pass this on to the others, but I did want to say one thing that's just kind of interesting. I read a study once that looked at broccoli sprouts as something that could kill off H. pylori, or prevent. No, it was actually killing off the Helicobacter, and they found that the broccoli sprouts were more effective than some of the most potent drugs that they pitted it against in this study. Very, very interesting. Broccoli sprouts produce probably 50 to 100 times more sulforaphane than mature broccoli. And this has some pretty profound effects on bad bacteria. But anyway, I'll pass it on.
Well, I just want to concur with the idea that cruciferous vegetables inhibit the growth of H. pylori and increase the resistance of the stomach to acid and help restore the viability and health of the cells that line the digestive tract. In other words, let me say that one more time, that there's a compound called ITC, or isothiocyanates, and there's about 100 different isothiocyanates that are produced when you eat different types of green vegetables. Now, the enzyme that makes the isothiocyanates is called myrosinase. And myrosinase is heat sensitive. So when you cook your broccoli or your Brussels sprouts, and then you chew it, you're not going to form any of those protective compounds because the green vegetable plant cell has a compound called glucosinolate inside the vegetable. And the myrosinase enzyme changes the glucosinolate into the isothiocyanate. And that occurs in the mouth as you're chewing the vegetable. And the isothiocyanate is not heat sensitive, but the myrosinase enzyme is. So when you cook the cruciferous vegetable, you don't get as many ITCs formed. So it's the regular consumption, the everyday, almost everyday consumption of raw greens, raw cruciferous vegetables, broccoli sprouts, kale, collards, bok choy, arugula, watercress, raw in your diet, chewed well in the mouth and it's with a salad.
Say that twice.
Yeah, that the better you chew them, the more ITCs that are formed. Now, you could get some ITC formation from your cooked Brussels sprouts and cooked broccoli because the myrosinase enzyme that you got from eating the raw vegetables could be utilized by the body to create some more ITCs from the cooked vegetables that you ate, but you still have to eat some of those raw vegetables to get the myrosinase enzyme to activate the cooked vegetables. The point I'm making is that intellectually, and put some shredded red cabbage on your salad. Put some green cabbage or savoy cabbage. Put some kale. Put some bok choy. Put some arugula. Put watercress. Intentionally put these green vegetables and chew them up very well as part of your salad. Don't just eat straight lettuce. And then, obviously, the better you chew your salad, the more you produce. So I'm suggesting that the overgrowth of H. pylori is a nutritional problem. Immune system suppression. It shouldn't happen in people that have really strong immune systems eating a healthy diet. And also the protective production of the mucosal lining, the ability of the cells to repair themselves, because we have a lot of sloughing of cells and destruction of the digestive lining with normal digestion. Those cells have to replicate and repair themselves all the time. And that cell repair, replenishment of the cells and replenishment of mucus all has to do with the quality of your diet too. And of course, I know you're going to bring up stress and other issues and sleep and other things that play a role, but the point is that we have control over this condition. And that, if you eat the American diet with all the high protein foods that demand so much extra acid, and the processed foods and the things that close off the elimination of food, in other words, we keep food in our digestive tract and our stomach so long the acid floats around there forever, then you're going to have hemorrhoids, diverticulum, reflux, and you have to live close to a good hospital and make sure you're friendly with all the physicians there and take a lot of drugs.
That's an oxymoron, close to a good hospital. This is certainly a modern disease, like Dr. Fuhrman just said. It was considered when I was a boy a blue-collar concern. My grandfather, who was a painter, he used to paint bridges going from New York to New Jersey and one part of New York to the other. When I smell Rolaids, which is an antacid, I become sentimental. He was my good buddy. And you didn't see the middle and upper middle class with these problems. But ironically, everyone got into the trap. And the trap is eating foods that we ought not to consume. And of course, animal-based foods are there. Processed, chemicalized, pesticide, fungicide, riddled foods. Genetically modified foods are the number one. I'm sure you listened closely on the panel last night where Jeffrey actually probably quoted a Monsanto study that before they put Roundup on the market, they actually proved in their own study that it perforated the intestines of the animals. And this Senef, out of MIT has just reconfirmed with autism. Remember I spoke about autism the other day, and she's showing that the gastrointestinal problem, and there's a pathway that shuts down, and it's because of what that Roundup does. It's spliced into high fructose corn syrup. The other thing I'd like to say about this is that I see it correctable in the vast majority of cases. Everything we've said, we don't have to repeat. Eating a good diet, I would say more so raw. There's very little benefit when you cook a cruciferous vegetable. I got that from the horse's mouth, the #1 epicenter of phytochemical research, Oregon State University, where Linus Pauling's alma mater was. And after his death, they moved it from Palo Alto up there. I had the privilege to spend a half a day with the researchers, and I asked them something interesting, because I'm acutely interested in phytochemicals, because it gave us the answer of why the Hippocrates program has been so incredibly helpful in people's conquest of disorders and fighting disease and staying young. And I said, when you're studying, do you notice a difference between when you're looking at a raw material and it's cooked? They said it's inert when it's cooked. I said, do you report that? And they said, absolutely not. I said, why wouldn't you report that? They said, it's not warranted in the research. They're not asking us to report if something's active or not. They want us to identify and name a phytochemical in the food. Isn't that interesting? So that's how science works. They're on one page and they don't see its blinders on them. But everything that was said here by everyone was completely correct with the sulforaphane that you get in the cabbage family. Onion sprouts are higher than anything in it. Garlic sprouts. You can just take garlic, raw garlic, organic of course, because most of it's irradiated if it's not raw. Put that into a little container in your kitchen window and grow it and eat the greens. Delicious, by the way, too. The other thing is fenugreek sprout juice has been incredibly effective. Raw aloe has been effective. We actually suggest anal implantation of some of this when you have problems. H. pylori can be helped. I don't think it can be corrected when it's large enough just by broccoli sprouts alone. It may be more preventative. But what I've seen is in all the years we've used massive amounts of broccoli sprouts, usually it returns. So either you go the mainstream way where a doctor gives you a short-term antibiotic, which works in 99% of the cases, or a more natural way, you'd go to an herbal with a doctor who knows what she or he's doing with this. But this is a big issue because esophageal cancer is a nasty cancer. And a high percentage of people that have consistent auto-reflux end up with that cancer. Or, by the way, they don't talk about other forms of cancer, stomach cancer, colon cancer, much higher levels of it. And I wouldn't doubt if other forms of cancer that maybe we're not aware of today are part and parcel to it.
Excuse me, Steve, one other comment. We have lots of people over the course of time when they're working on their health that want to get off of an acid suppression medication such as the purple pill. That's a bit hard to do because it suppresses acid to such a degree that when you stop it, there's a surge of acid, convincing you in a very experiential way that you must go back on it and stay on it. And the pharmaceutical company's literature does not tell people what the helpful way is to get off the product. That might be very helpful in who might want to try it. But to get people off of a acid-blocking agent that works for 24 to 36 hours, we tell people that there's going to be an acid surge. You need to expect that. And we give you a substitute like a Pepsid or a Zantac that has an acid-suppressing time period of 6 to 12 hours. And to use those only when absolutely necessary while they're coming off. Now, this lady whose story you heard earlier today when Dr. Deal was talking, who had 16 diseases, one of which was heartburn and acid indigestion and irritable bowel and all kinds of things, she felt better right away in 2 weeks on the therapeutic lifestyle change program. But it was a little bit hard for her to give up the acid suppression medication. And so it needed to be tapered and going to, kind of like coming off cigarettes and going to a lower nicotine cigarette. Still the same number of cigarettes, but less and less, tapering off the addictive component. So that's something to keep in mind, that you have to work your way off of an H2 blocker.
One addendum to this is the purple pill, people don't have the advantage to see a physician anymore. That's gone over the counter now. So unless you're a diligent research scientist who's taking the purple pill, you probably won't get the advice. And this is really smart and good advice. So you're taking it and you're going to have surges and it's a perpetuation of it.
Associated Press, CDC, more American adults hobbled by arthritis. A surprising jump in the number of Americans hobbled by arthritis may be due to obesity, health experts said Thursday. About 22% of U.S. adults have been told by a doctor that they have arthritis, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported. The statistic comes from a national telephone polling of tens of thousands of adults in 2007 through 2009. That translates to nearly 50 million people with the joint disease. It's also roughly the same percentage with arthritis as reported in a 2003-2005 study. But there was a significant jump in adults who said their joint pain or other arthritis symptoms limited their usual activities to 9.4% from 8.3%. That means more than 21 million adults have trouble climbing stairs, dressing, gardening, or doing other things, up from less than 19 million only a few years before, the CDC researchers estimated. Would you each tell me what the research says about this?
I'll start. Well, the joints of the body get their blood supply through diffusion through joint capsule. In other words, they're indicators of disease in their early stages. And whether the disease is pro-inflammatory, and by the way, there's two types of arthritis, at least two types, and we're talking about the autoimmune condition, rheumatoid arthritis, which is not as common in other autoimmune diseases that can affect the joints, like psoriatic arthritis, which is, by the way, which is responsive to nutritional protocols. And there's the more everyday arthritis called osteoarthritis, which is what you're probably referring to here, which is more like wear and tear arthritis that people get, which affects their large joints in their backs. And what I'm saying here, which was mentioned by one of you yesterday, I think it was, that the discs desiccate and shrink and dry out when they age prematurely, and we develop arthritic changes in our body to the joints sometimes earlier than we develop those changes in the heart, because these parts of the body, their blood supply is very vulnerable. So, for example, let's see if we use the knee joint, for example. In the cartilage and that surround the knee joint aren't permeated by a lot of blood vessels. The blood vessels surround the joint capsule, and oxygen and nutrients go through the joint capsule and through diffusion go to supply the cartilage with nourishment. And those very fine, fragile blood vessels, a little bit of atherosclerosis, a little bit of sludging of the blood, a little bit of fatty sticking together, called rouleau formation, where the red blood vessels stick together like coins stacked up. In other words, the blood vessels are so tiny that it's easy for these joints to become deoxygenated, or not properly nourished, or not get the antioxidants and free radical fighters they need, and we get the degeneration of the joint tissue. And now we get the cells that make new joint cartilage not working as fast as the cells that are destroying. We're always losing some joint material and putting it back and losing. There's always a repair and destruction and repair and destruction. The point is, when we're youthful, when we're vibrant, when we're healthy, we have good nutrition and good oxygenation of tissues, we fuel the regeneration process. And the wear and tear and everyday use is restored and repaired back to normal again. And when we don't do that, then we get destruction, repair, degeneration, and eats away little by little. The cartilage degenerates. We get osteophyte formation. We get the cartilage reforms itself abnormally in a low oxygen environment. It forms itself not smooth anymore. In other words, an excellent diet keeps us younger. It keeps us feeling better. It keeps us more emotionally positive about life, and it keeps us the ability to physically enjoy our life because we maintain our youthful joints and muscles, mobility, and ability to be active and enjoy life more when we eat properly. It's one of the, and that's why I feel so blessed to have learned about this when I was younger, because I can enjoy doing sports and activities with my children. I want to enjoy them with my grandchildren. I want to be able to stay physically fit and active in the later years, and that's one of the greatest benefits of eating a diet that's such a healthy diet.
And we want it for our great-great-great-grandchildren.
Yeah.
What Dr. Fuhrman just said is absolutely correct. Mobility is important. One of the issues that is often not looked at in nutrition and with nutritionists is that 6 out of 10 of us worldwide in the modern world are dehydrated. Consistently, ever since I've been reading this stuff, 6 out of 10 of us don't have enough water. Now, blood not going to the cartilage, blood not going to the joints, blood not going to the heart or the brain, whatever it may be, literally is determined on how much water you drink, because water is mostly, blood is mostly water. So that's your first and foremost concern. And in water, it's mostly oxygen. So to bring oxygen there, and the other thing is people ask me what the #1 anti-inflammatory medicine is. It's water. Boy, do we have a lot of data, millions of studies it seems, on curcumins out of turmeric, and they're great and wonderful, but guess what? Water is actually more important than any other for anti-inflammatory concerns. Now, going back to piggyback on what I suggested, break down kidneys, even much easier than cartilage, are the 3 elements. Remember nitrogen, and remember uric acid and sulfuric acid? They also work a lot longer to do it, but they break down joints. And that's from meat consumption, dairy consumption, and also whole grain, 100% organic bakery goods. Flour products are highly, highly acid. You don't have as much sulfuric acid and nitrogen in it, but you have plenty of nitrogen, enough to break it down. Another big problem is fruit. People don't realize that all fruit is picked unripened, and all unripened fruit is highly acid. And anyone that's trying to tell you that fruit ripens when it's picked prematurely doesn't know what they're talking about. There's only one fruit that ripens after it's picked, and that's a banana. In the skin, it has adequate enzymes. But my God, here in my state, Florida, we produce 50% of the orange juice in the world. So if you're in China drinking orange juice, you may possibly be drinking Florida orange juice. And what I can tell you, because I've lived here for a long time now, is they start picking juice oranges in October. They actually ripen in April. Now, can you imagine how acid that is to the body? Well, I can imagine, because about 25 years ago, I took a bone and I stuck it in unripened orange juice and watched it decay. And so it took a lot longer than it would in the human body. It took a lot longer than in the human body. But there's even things that look like legal and wonderful and everyone's happy with them and fruit's great. But the truth of the matter is this contributes to osteo, rheumatoid, and every other form of arthritis. Now, I had the great privilege to find my soulmate, my wife, back in 1978. Who's the co-director of Hippocrates, and as I always say, the brains behind Hippocrates. She's quiet, so you think I'm the leader. She was running the world's most famous center, natural center, directing it for arthritis. And unlike in your country, here in the United States, the Swedish government is really pro-citizens. Isn't that amazing? They actually like the people in Sweden, and they try to help the people in Sweden, and they actually prefer to help citizens before corporate interest. And so the government came in and said, "My, this is remarkable. You're putting people on plant-based diets and having them drink massive amounts of juices and liquids and fluid, and people are reporting they're getting well. So let's come in and do research." So the citizens paid for the research in Sweden. They spent $2.5 million, and the day after the study was finished, the Swedish government began to send Swedish citizens there. And in 1982, I asked one of the parliamentarians, "Why do you do that?" Just to see what he would say. And he said, "Well, you would like to think we're nice people, and we are, but my God, it saves us lots of money." Do you know how many dollars, or krona they call it there, doctor's office visits take until the person's crippled, and how much medicine cost? And so we've seen this clinically done both at Brenda, the clinic my wife directed, at Hippocrates. I'm sure Dr. Fuhrman, you weren't an expert, but you've seen arthritis, I'm sure. Anyone that changes a lifestyle and diet, and the most important thing he said was movement and exercise. Vegans who eat healthy diets, if you don't move and exercise, you could have degradation and end up with an arthritic condition too.
I don't think I said that, but I'll accept it. Did you want to say something? Or can I,
Oh, you go ahead.
I just wanted to make two comments. Number one, that we have to make sure that we don't confuse certain issues here, that we have a preponderance of evidence to show that eating fruit protects against cancer and increases lifespan, benefits the heart, benefits the eyes, and there's even studies to show that certain fruits like berries encourage the reversal of cancer, like squamous cell carcinoma or esophageal cancer. We have studies on that, number one. And there's full of polyphenols that actually reduce glucose, that interfere with the absorption of glucose, and certain fruits have very low glycemic effects. So certainly a person could overeat fruit, but I don't want to put a negative blanket on all fruit, and eating fruit in general. Number two, I just wanted to give the other alternative that I don't agree with the idea that we need much water either. I don't think we have science to support that theory. That, in other words, any science that shows that is done on SAD eating people, they eat a diet of processed foods, high salt, and animal products. But what if I'm eating a diet of, melons and tomatoes and cucumbers and salads and sprouts and all these high liquid foods, and you're not eating high salt? Don't forget, I take care of a lot of people that are coming from an American diet, a junk food eating diet, a processed food eating diet, and they go on to a healthy nutritarian diet, and they may lose 20 pounds in a week. 20 pounds in a week. And they're not losing fat, they're losing water weight. They're peeing out a lot of water because, number one, not just the extra salt, your body holds on to water when you're toxic. In other words, let me give you an example. A guy comes to see me, and I put him, years ago, he's in my guest house. And so he's overweight, and I'm just keeping him there, like you see people day in and day out. And he loses a pound a day. He loses it like 10 days, 10 pounds, 20 days, 20 pounds, 21 days, 21 pounds. And then he goes out to a vegan singles dance that night with and he has like a corn muffin and some macaroni pasta salad. And he comes back and he gains 3 pounds. He didn't eat 3 pounds of food. He only ate like a little bit of food. How did he gain 3 pounds? Well, the body's holding on to water now. And then he didn't lose the weight the next 3 or 4 days. It took him like another 4 or 5 days to get back into the detox mode again, to start losing weight again. But he wasn't losing fat then. He was losing a lot of, some fat, but a lot of water. What I'm saying is, as the body is flooded with nutrients, as you stop taking in all the toxins, your body doesn't need to hold on to all that water anymore. It doesn't have to dilute all the toxicity of the tissues that are inflamed, that need to hold them. Some of that body weight people are carrying is excess water from all the junk they're eating, and you diurese a tremendous amount of water when you eat healthfully. And when you're eating a low-salt, high-water content diet, you don't need that much water. I mean, maybe you do in Florida, when it's so hot and you're sweating and you're outdoors and you're exercising. Yeah, for sure. But if you're not, I certainly drink a lot of water when I'm exercising, playing tennis, sweating, skiing, working out in the gym, doing jumping, whatever it is I'm drinking water. But in a normal, you don't need as much water as people think you need if you eat healthfully. And,
let's not confuse the people. He's not saying you don't need fluid.
Right.
He's saying, and I completely concur with this, I'd rather have you eat the vegetables. Celery, incredibly high. Drink the juices. But if you don't get enough from that, and the point you're making is very important, an arid climate, more water, you need about a ½ ounce of fluid, legal good fluid, for every 1 pound body weight. Now, if you're in an arid climate and exercising, you need probably double that.
One of the first things that I would like to say is how disappointing it is that so many of our major arthritis organizations in the world deny any connection between diet and arthritis and tell patients over and over that there are no diet changes that can be made that will be of any benefit. Because I know every single one of us has seen remarkable changes when people change diet, and actually there are some fairly good studies, and a number of studies that have shown that vegetarian diets, and particularly vegan and raw vegan diets, are extremely effective for reversing many of the symptoms of arthritis. And so we know that. And one of the things from an experience perspective that I've seen is that people tend to often do extraordinarily well just removing dairy and meat. Those two things, but especially dairy. And I think for a lot of people, food sensitivities are hugely important if they're sensitive to gluten or they're sensitive to dairy, and many people are sensitive to dairy. This can make arthritis a whole lot worse. And I'll tell you, from a personal perspective, just my own experience, and I have in my family a lot of diabetes, a lot of arthritis, a lot of these chronic diseases, and by the time people in my family reach my age, I'm 56 years old, they have these diseases already, and I'll tell you, I'm at 56 years of age, I don't feel any different than I did when I was 25. I can still run as fast, jump as fast, I can still stand on my head and do handstands and whatever. I really don't feel any different. And I think that should be the norm instead of the other way around. And so we have to recognize that when we take foods and we strip them of everything of value to human health, so you take whether it's a grain or whatever it is, and we're processing them to death, We remove everything of value. And who eats a bowl of flour? Nobody. Before you eat the flour, you add a bunch of garbage to it. Sugar and trans fats and colors and flavors and preservatives, and then you eat it, and we wonder why we're all sick. We've got to get off this thing of eating, or destroying our food before we eat it. And the only reason we do that is because people are trying to sell a 25-cent product for $2.50.
That's it.
That's the bottom line. And so we've got to recognize that. And so I think people can do incredibly well at reversing these kinds of inflammatory diseases by eating a less inflammatory diet. And it's not rocket science.
How are we fixed for time, Steve?
Go ahead.
So one of the things we're going to talk about tomorrow is the gut as gateway to chronic disease. And one of those gateways is autoimmune disease, or particularly any disease that involves inflammation. And we'll learn that the intestinal tract, particularly the lower half of it, the colon, is charged with recycling water, so you don't have to drink so much, but not recycling waste. And if you do not have the right bacteria, which then are present because you eat the right food, and if those bacteria don't digest the right food, particularly fiber, then you don't have the butyrate or the butyric acid, which is a fuel for those lining cells that are able to recycle water but not recycle waste. And if you recycle waste, then the immune system, which lines the GI tract, will react because it thinks that it's seeing something foreign, and what it is seeing is something that it never should have seen. And so getting the gut healthy so that it's not leaky, and getting the bacteria helpful rather than harmful, and getting the food in that feeds all of that is something that we'll talk about when we talk about the gut as gateway to chronic disease. That will be, I was thinking of the gluten that you mentioned, and people that are reversing rheumatoid arthritis, a lot of times they're just taking away gluten as the first step. So we'll try and make sense of all that tomorrow.
Okay, I'm going to sneak in one more, just to sneak one more. And so maybe if you guys could give slightly briefer answers, just so you could each answer and tell us what the research says. But I'd like to ask this one more. Mother Nature Network. Asthma rates at highest level ever, says CDC. 25.7 million people had asthma in 2010, including 7 million who were younger than 18. Asthma rates in the United States increased over the past decade to their highest level ever, according to a new government report. The portion of people in the U.S. with asthma rose from 7.3% in 2001 to 8.4% in 2010, according to the report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. This means 25.7 million people had asthma in 2010, including 7 million who were younger than 18. If you guys would each give your thoughts on what the research shows.
I'll just start. I'm not going to start. I'd like you to start again. I read a lot of meta-studies because I spend a lot of time outside of the United States. So we seem to be very Americana in our research and statistics and data here. I want the listeners worldwide now, today, and in the future to realize that it's reflective of what you see in all of the developed world. So the same statistics you'd see in Germany or in France or in Italy or Spain, it's very similar. So don't think, oh, this is an American conference and they have the problem. Unfortunately, we share that problem with you. You all learned English.
We're great at exporting our culture and our diseases. Asthma and allergy and eczema, something that we see a lot in children. Part of this is being now traced back to the bacterial flora that the immune system sees in the first hours and days and weeks and months of life. Children are not born sterile like we thought they were. There's actually bacteria that live in the umbilical cord, and there's bacteria everywhere that are actually good bacteria, belong there and are helpful and are actually using some of their DNA is being used by the body to run certain body functions. So what a woman eats has to do with what the genetic settings are in the chromosomes of the child. We'll talk about that tomorrow afternoon. Whether or not the child is a cesarean section or a natural birth sets different bacterial settings in the infant's body. Whether or not that child is breastfed versus bottle-fed completely changes the predominant bacteria that's in the GI tract. And by the way, a C-section child that's bottle-fed does not have the dominant lactobacillus and bifidobacter that are needed to convert fiber into butyrate to get a gut to be a semi-permeable membrane and recycle water and not waste. And the immune system gets intolerant and overreactive rather than tolerant and underreactive when the child starts out with a set of bacteria that are not natural. And so they enter life then with the immune system being a hyper. And so whether the skin is overreactive or whether the airways are overreactive as an asthma, or whether the GI tract is overreactive to certain foods or become sort of allergic to them, that's turning out to be highly related to the good bacteria that are present or not present in the child's GI tract. So that's something that we'll all be watching closely.
This is a lecture that we won't want to miss. It sounds fascinating. It's amazing how much we're learning about healthy microbiome and even affecting brain function. Who would have known? But very, very important subject. I won't say much about this topic except that I've recently seen some reasonable research on the connection between dairy intake and asthma. And also, I think we really need to think about all of these pollutants, these chemical contaminants that move up the food chain that are poisoning us. And I think those are two things that we also need to consider where asthma is concerned.
I'm on. Let me just add a couple of things, and especially that, you know, I've been in the trenches treating people with these conditions for many, many years, and it's very important and exciting to watch people get well and recover from asthma. And I've had, you know, lots of patients make complete recoveries, especially people who had to wake in the middle of the night to use inhalers and who have no life, who couldn't exercise. So really, it's a very troubling disease for a lot of people. So that they add two things. One is we know that asthma is reduced in populations that live on dirt floors, for example, and are exposed more to more dirt. Even having dogs to bring dirt into the house lowers the risk of asthma in children and in allergies because you're exposed to more bacterial challenges. And also the use of, that doctors treat young children with antibiotics, young in life, when they're young. Usually it's for an ear infection that's predominantly viral. The first ear infection is usually viral, and the doctor then gives them an antibiotic for a viral infection. The child could have recovered without an antibiotic, but the use of the antibiotic when they're young predisposed them to more frequent and more serious bacterial ear infections, which they wouldn't have had they not been treating the first one with an antibiotic, which then kills out a lot of the good bacteria and predisposes you to more serious organisms that are more pathogenic. But there's a link between those antibiotics used early below the first year of life or used early in life and a higher risk of asthma because it changes the gut flora and other problems like that. And there's a link between the overuse of antibiotics and the continual use of antibiotics and breast cancer, for example. You know, women who use antibiotics frequently or have a higher rate of breast cancer. So we're talking about the medical profession does contribute to asthma to a degree by the overuse of drugs, which is another way we get more toxins and petrochemicals into our body that can cause more excitatory and pro-inflammatory and irritability of tissues. And, you know, let me just say that the inflammatory response is closely intertwined with the process of repair. In other words, in the book Robinson-Cochran, that all medical students learn, or used to at least, in the first year of medical school, pathology book we learned. And right in that book it said the inflammatory response is closely intertwined with the process of repair, and inflammation serves to wall off and remove and attempt to reconstitute the damaged tissue and as much as possible restore the tissue to its pristine state. In other words, the inflammatory response has a right direction to it.
Yeah, exactly. Repeat that. So there's inflammation's a necessity to heal.
To heal, right. So sometimes when you have an asthmatic who you're using beta agonists, which can be life-saving to allow the person to breathe, but it also can cause more chronic irritation and make the person more predisposed to asthma. And when you use oral steroids and they use inhaled steroids, they could be making the person feel better, but you're essentially preventing some of the inflammatory substance from being removed from the body, because the attack itself or the inflammation itself is something that could be dangerous, but is still the body trying to remove toxins and remove waste products from its tissue. So what I'm saying is, with good nutrition, with allowing other channels of elimination and detoxification to be mobilized, with weaning off the oral medication and getting onto getting off the beta agonists, I find with time that the person can get by with just an inhaled steroid used with a spacer, and then we can reduce the dose gradually, and we're able to gradually taper this person down to less use of medication. And then sometimes, on occasion, I've used therapeutic fasting, where I have the person, because the person really still needs some medication, and to take it away may exacerbate an attack. So I take it away under the auspices during a time when they're not eating food, because there's a very powerful natural anti-inflammatory effects of fasting, and that can enable them to stay off the inhalers for a period of time to allow the detox to resolve without creating a problem where they need to take medications for it. It can, so they're breathing better, and then that can help them get to a point where they can get free of their asthma totally. So I've taken care of hundreds of cases with asthma with excellent success, sometimes necessitating to use fasting, but most of the time just slowly over the years seeing asthma and allergies get better and slowly weaning off medications, and sometimes it takes 6 months, 12 months, or 24 months to see these improve themselves sufficiently. And you've probably seen similar.
I'll try to be concise and succinct. Pollutants are the #1 cause this is skyrocketing. And let's name a few, because it's not just the air pollution, the water pollution, the pollutants on your food, but your clothing. It outgasses 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Your bedding, I was just told 3 days ago now, 5 years ago, they've demanded you put 2.5 times more fire retardants on it. All infant clothing, 8 out of 10 infant products, high chairs, car seats, all have fire retardants on them. If you look at inner cities here in the United States, there's 100% of the children in these inner city schools that have asthma. Mold, yeast, fungus, bacteria, and certainly on a horribly bad diet. These are deserts for food. These people eat nothing but junk food. They can't even buy anything but junk food. And many of these people don't have an income to even get in the car and go somewhere else and buy the food. There's, as you saw the other day in Nelson Campbell's wonderful documentary, they're going into a lot of these underprivileged areas here in this country and bringing in fresh fruits and vegetables, and congratulations to them for that. So this is a plague. There's so many plagues. I mean, as I said to you the other day, if you're depressed or neurotic, you shouldn't be listening, because we have resolution for all of this, by the way. Matter of fact, next year's conference will be 35 days on resolutions. Right, Steve? Let's talk about the remarkable thing that you discussed. If a mother is breastfeeding, now, we used to take that for granted, but it doesn't happen in the majority of cases. Within a matter of minutes after the baby comes out of her womb and they suckle on her breast, Lactobacillus bifidus comes out. Do you realize if you live 200 years, that's enough bacteria to have your immune system function at 100% level? And MIT did a study on that back in the late 60s where they showed one soda throw that into an imbalance. Several, obviously. I used to drink 5 or 6 a day, probably wipe it out. 70% of your immune system comes from the bacteria in your intestinal tract. This is not a small thing. It's a very big thing. And now today in psychiatric medicine, as you heard over the last few days, we recognize that the gut factor is probably the most important factor. Serotonin is produced in that area, not in the brain as they're teaching in neuron science at universities today, but almost overwhelmingly inside the intestinal tract, the stomach, etc. So if you don't have that going on, and you don't have good chemistry and good hormonal balance, hormones are the messengers in the body. They're the language of the body. And the lungs actually stop learning how to work, especially if they have pollutants going into them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
I want to thank the four of you very much for taking your time to come here and share all this information with us.